This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. To view Anthony van Dyck's work is to stand in the presence of a master and be awestruck. To think that one could copy said works, well, that takes some chutzpah. And while this painting, a copy of an Anthony van Dyck portrait, is not by Van Dyck himself, the skill and expertise with which it was executed speaks to mastery. Unfortunately, this painting has suffered at the hands of people who were less than masterful. Even through the old grime and varnish, we can see that the painting has been skinned, over-cleaned and abraded, and much of the original detail has been lost. There is a lot of retouching on this painting, an attempt to cover up the previous mistake. But underneath all of this, well, I think there is still something masterful. But it's going to take some work to find. My first stop is into my storage room, where I have my ultraviolet light set up, because I need to take a look at this painting, or at least beyond what I can see with my naked eye. I want to see the old varnish and the old retouching, and UV light can help me do just that. Learning to read a black light is difficult, but with years of experience, I've come to be able to recognize the retouching and the old varnish. Here, we can see these dark spots as new retouching on top of the old varnish. They fluoresce or react with the UV light strongly. But up in her hair and the background, we can see, well, something that looks like retouching, and then, as I look closer, I can see lots of spots that look like retouching. In fact, much of this painting has been retouched, glazed in, and overpainted. And those are the things that worry me about any conservation, because what lies beneath all of this old work, well, we'll just have to find out. Uniqueness or novelty is one of the hallmarks of creativity. But for artists, sometimes the burden of content and narrative is just too much. And that's where the copy is critical. Frankly, the burden of creativity is omnipresent, even in your website design. But Squarespace offers an assist to those who may be more focused on the content of their website than the design. And Squarespace calls it design intelligence. Based on over 2 decades of experience, they've built a comprehensive AI suite of tools to help you unlock your creative potential, taking your inputs and scaling them up to allow you to build a beautiful, personalized, and dynamic website with no coding or design experience necessary, allowing you to focus on the content, your artwork, your store, your business, or your own piece of the World Wide Web. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Baumgartner to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. The process of copying artworks is not new. In fact, it dates back to, well, the first artworks. Venture into any famous museum, and the odds that you'll find an artist with an easel set up in front of their favorite painting, working dutifully to capture that mastery on their own canvas is pretty high. This is how artists learn. We find things that inspire us, and then we seek to copy them, to learn how they were made, to understand the construction and the wizardry. And while nobody would assume that this piece is an Anthony van Dyck, first, it's smaller than the original, and the original is very well known and in a museum. This painting is no poor copy. It is very impressive. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, it's been through the ringer. We can see just with these tacks how it's been kind of poorly treated. Whoever conserved this painting in the past maybe didn't know what they were doing, or was reckless, or didn't understand how this artist created this painting and found themselves, well, behind the 8 ball. Now, to conserve this painting, I have to undo all of that old work. And of course, it starts by removing this painting and all of its various tacks, indicating perhaps multiple rounds of conservation, from the support. Once the painting is released from the support, I can remove this stretcher and save it for later. I'm going to take off this old lining because, well, I have a sneaking suspicion that we're going to find some damage underneath, and I want to be able to repair it better. Luckily for me, whomever did this lining was not a master, and you can see with very little effort, it peels right off. This is indicative of a failed glue lining. Over time, that glue becomes brittle and deteriorates and loses its adhesion properties. And that's good for me because this painting is going to require a lot of work. So anything that is easy, well, I'll take those wins. Now I will save this old canvas because I can use it for inlays. I'll add it to my stock of old canvases and hopefully it will become a donor for another piece when it's in need. Now I do see one area of tear, and that's probably why the piece was lined. Now though the glue has failed, there is still remnants of it on the back of this canvas, and I need to remove all of that old glue. Rather than doing it wet with water or laponite, I'm going to try to remove it dry, because it's less trauma on the painting, and if I can avoid dampening this canvas, it's better for the canvas and me. Using a scalpel blade, I'm just gliding over the surface and letting the friction break up this old rabbit skin glue lining. It doesn't take a lot of effort or pressure. I just move the blade across and the glue flakes right off. Now, though it is a relatively easy process, it is very time-consuming. I need to make multiple passes over the entire canvas to make sure all of that adhesive is removed. But over the course of a few hours, I do get all of this glue off, and then I can remove it with a brush from the back of the canvas. Now, I mentioned that I saw an area of old repair, and this has a thicker layer of adhesive on it, so this does need to be removed with laponite. This will soften up all of that old water-based adhesive, and then I can come back with my scalpel and scrape it off. It needs to be removed because it's built up and it will depress on the front of the canvas and will get a bump if I don't do this process. And then with all of the adhesive removed, I'm going to bring the painting back to the hot table and do the first of a few treatments. And this is going to use moisture, heat, and pressure to affect positive change on the surface of the painting, to remove the planar distortions and ripples and get it flat. The use of a hot table, again, isn't new, but it's one of the most critical tools we have in the conservation studio, because without this, we really can't treat a painting holistically. Maybe we can treat part of it, but we need to treat the entire thing. And going piecemeal, while possible, offers more opportunity or potential for failure. So doing it in one fell swoop is really critical to ensuring the highest degree of success. And instantly we can see that the painting is much flatter. But there is one little spot over here that's protruding. This can happen for various reasons, but I suspect it's an old repair. After bringing the painting up to temperature, I'll turn the heat off, let it cool, remove the vacuum pressure, and then remove the painting from this mylar envelope, and then transfer it over to the table behind me, where it will rest under weights and felt for a couple of days over the weekend and acclimatize to the studio's relative humidity. If I left it on the table right now, it would just re-distort. You see, even though I didn't add any moisture to this painting, the canvas absorbs the humidity in the studio, and without pressure, it will distort. And now it's time to start cleaning this painting. And I'm both very excited and very anxious about what I'm going to find. I know that there's a lot of discolored varnish and a lot of overpainting, but I just don't know what's underneath that overpainting. But there's only one way to find out. We can see almost instantly how grimy and dirty and discolored this painting is. We knew the lace was supposed to be bright white, but seeing it come up from a dingy brown yellow to a beautiful, cool, crisp white is, well, it's really exciting. But I suspect that what I find when I remove all of this old varnish is not going to be as wonderful as these first little windows. I suspect we're going to find a painting that's been profoundly damaged. And no surprise, that little bump was old fill-in that was used to fill in a little divot. Instead of being pressed from the back, they just gobbed in some fill-in. So I'll use a scalpel and just remove that. I'm also going to use the scalpel to bring down some of the old fill-in that they used on this tear. Now this is actually oil paint. They just kind of gobbed in oil paint into this tear and sealed it up. This is not great, but it's solid, and I don't need to take all of it out because it would result in having a big open gash in this canvas that I'd later have to fill. Now, while I have my scalpel, I'm going to try to remove as much of this discolored overpaint as I can. There is going to be a lot of retouching on this painting, but if I can remove some of what I have to cover, maybe there's a little bit less retouching, or maybe there are areas that I don't need to retouch at all. Either way, all of this old discolored paint needs to go, and the scalpel is the tool that gets that done. Throughout the painting, I'm able to remove more areas of this overpaint, which I'm still optimistic will make the rest of my work a little bit easier. But I've been optimistic before, and we know where that lands me. I'm going to be doing a strip lining on this painting instead of a full lining. We don't need to line the painting because the majority of the canvas is stable. It's just that one little tear. Now the strip lining is going to add fidelity to the tacking edge and allow me to tack it to the stretcher without worrying that it will tear or otherwise be compromised in the future. And I use a piece of frayed Belgian linen for a couple of reasons. One, the fray allows more surface area for the adhesive film to bond to the linen. And two, it creates a softer transition so that we don't get a hard, crisp edge telegraphing to the front of the painting. Even though this will be covered by the frame, I still want to reduce the chance that that happens. Now, in the area where the tear was, because it's filled with old oil paint, I don't need to use bridging. I can just take a little bit of silk organza and the film or adhesive and add a little bit of structural support. This is just kind of a belt and suspenders. Frankly, this tear is solid. The oil paint has cured in the tear and has made it a unified, homogeneous surface. So even if I didn't do this, it would be fine. But I'm going to do this because I have access to the back and because it's a good policy, just to make sure. Like I said, belt and suspenders. While the painting is flat and on the table on a hard surface, I'm going to start filling in all of these losses. Now, luckily for me, there aren't a ton of losses. There's our little friend here, and I'm filling this in, and it's going to be flush and flat. When I'm done with it, it's not going to protrude like it did before. I'll also take a pass at the area where the tear was. Again, there isn't much paint loss here, a good thing for me, but if there are any areas where there are slight divots, I need to fill them in so that they don't catch the raking light when we're looking at the painting and betray the image. After the fill-in has dried, I can come back with a little swab, a little bit of water, and just remove the excess. I could certainly leave this here, it's really smooth, but it's unnecessary and it's a sign of sloppy work, and I don't want that. I also don't want to cover up any of the original paint with this fill-in medium. And now it's time to return this painting to its stretcher. We're lucky that we have a proper stretcher that can be keyed out, but we need to square it up, because in the process of removing the painting from the support, I may have bumped it or gotten it out of square, and we don't want to return the painting to something that's not square. I'll use some nails in the corners to make sure that it's locked in place and it doesn't move as I'm handling it. And once I've got the painting oriented how I like, I'll just ease over the edge to make a soft crease, which will not only help keep it aligned, but also help keep any of the paint from flaking as I bend that tacking edge over the stretcher. And then, as we all learned in art school, we'll start in the center and add a little bit of tension with a little bit of tacking and create a diamond in the center of the painting that is taut. And then we'll work from the center out to all of the corners. And we do this so that if there's any slack, we can drive it to the corners where we can remove it a little bit easier, and also where the keys are, which will expand the stretcher a little bit more. Now, we don't want any slack, but sometimes it happens. I'll fold in the corners to make sure that they're nice and tight and that they don't fray, and then drive in a few more tacks. And then I can turn my attention to the back of this canvas and clean up all of that canvas that I've added. And with the painting fully stretched, I can go ahead and remove these nails that held the stretcher square and begin tidying up the back. And recently I was speaking to somebody about this process, cleaning up the back, which frankly is almost completely unnecessary. Nobody really sees it, it doesn't provide any value to the actual painting, and it could be gone without. But it leads me to question why we do things, sometimes even the small, minute things. And I think it's about finding meaning and value in the time that we spend here on this little rock. Honing in on something and doing it until perfection, and then doing it again and again, and continuously trying to refine that process until there is no more room for improvement, well, that's meaning, and that's value. And that's the type of thing that can sustain us when it feels really hard to be a human and find meaning in your everyday life. So, you didn't think there'd be that much being asked of a little tack and some canvas, did you? New keys are used in place of the old ones, which were broken and not sufficient in size for this support. And these are adding tension to the canvas, not a lot, just a little bit, to make sure that it's taut. Sometimes it's easier to add this tension with keys than it is to pull the canvas. Now you notice that those didn't have holes in them. Well, because they overlap, I'm going to put a little steel plate underneath and then drill the holes through both. The steel plate catches the drill bit, so I don't put a hole into the canvas. And now I can thread that fishing line through both of those keys. If I had drilled the holes before putting them in, they probably wouldn't have aligned and I would have had to take them out and start over. This is a hard lesson that I've learned more times than I care to recount. Before what will be an epic and monumental amount of retouching, I know I've already seen how it looks in the end, I need to apply this coating of synthetic resin. Isolation layer, saturation layer, whatever you want to call it. It's going to bring up the colors and provide a good surface for the retouching to adhere to, because there's going to be a lot of retouching. Now, speaking to the retouching, there are any number of ways we can approach a painting with this much damage. We could simply address the tears and the gouges and the real consequential damage. We could look to color block some of the other areas that have been lost, or, as the client wished, we can do a full restoration. Now, we're lucky because we have the original. We know what it looks like. I've downloaded high-resolution photographs of Anthony van Dyck's original painting, and I'm going to be trying to recreate that image. I'm going to be doing a lot of glazing, applying very thin, transparent layers of color onto the areas that have been skinned, where the paint has been removed. And I'm going to try my best to make this, skeleton look like the original. Now, this is a copy, so it won't be identical, but that's the goal, to try to make this look like a complete and whole painting, not a fractured copy. I told you it was a lot of retouching. You didn't believe me, but I told you. With all of that retouching done, it is now time for the final varnish, something that I'm very excited about, because it is here that I will see, A, if my retouching was accurate, if the colors matched, if it looks good, but also, hopefully, I'll see the whole painting come together. The retouching will disappear, and we'll just see the image. We'll see the copy, and we'll see this artist's attempt at mastery. I've chosen to brush this varnish on because I think it's going to give me the opportunity to give a really beautiful finish, and the painting is small enough that I can manage it. I don't need to spray it, which is sometimes helpful when the painting is really, really large. I'll use a standard bristle brush, which is very, very saturated with varnish, meaning I don't have to come back and add more varnish, and it covers a lot of surface area. Once the varnish is applied, I'll switch to a badger hair brush to brush it out and create that effect that I was talking about. A really beautiful, glittery surface. And here it is. While not an Anthony van Dyck, this painting is still stunning. While maybe not the hand of a master, this painting exhibits moments of mastery. And while not priceless, it can certainly be enjoyed by the owner now, free of damage. All of the old overpaint was removed, the old yellow varnish, and all of the damage. Unfortunately, we found that there was very little left of the original painting. But there was enough. Enough for me to embark upon an attempt at completing the painting. At taking all of those losses and unifying them, making them disappear. Creating something that can be viewed as a whole painting. And while I certainly wouldn't put myself anywhere near the caliber of Anthony van Dyck or even the artist who painted this painting, I'm happy to say that now the painting is no mere copy, but a marvelous one in its own right. When the painting arrived at the studio, subtle hints of mastery were there. But as we cleaned the painting and uncovered all of the damage, it looked as if maybe that sensitivity, that elegance, that mastery was lost forever. But with a lot of retouching, guided by the original, I think we've restored this painting to a presentable state, one where we can see what the artist was intending and appreciate it. And what of the original, Sir Anthony van Dyck's masterpiece? Well, it is without a doubt awesome and certainly worthy of a copy.